Hi, and welcome to Therapy Get You Some. I'm your host, Candice, and this week we're talking about grace. So, a little background, I generally tape the podcast once a week, and during the week, as I'm thinking about taping the podcast, I talk with people about, what topics I should cover and get opinions. And so, just the other day, I was talking to somebody about the topic of grace, and I said, I think I'm gonna do this week's podcast on grace. And their first thought was, they said, well, that's a little confusing. Tell me how you plan to bring grace and mental health together. And I was like, well, I know as a therapist, I bring up the topic of grace often in therapy. And it's the theme of things that I do. So in my classroom as a social work educator, grace is always the theme of my class. I extend grace without question, and it does not run out for the most part. And so we talk. So I kind of went into the what I'm going to talk about today with that person, and they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I get it. Now you should do it." They mentioned when they first thought of grace, their first thought was God's grace, and oftentimes, especially if you're a Christian, that is the first thought you're going to have when somebody says grace. Your first thought is God's grace, and so, but as humans, we use the word grace all the time. If I have a bill due and I forget about it, my first thought is, I hope they have a grace period, right? What is a grace period? It's a time period where I can pay my bill late and not receive any penalty. I get the grace period just because the company has extended that grace period to me. I didn't do anything to deserve the grace period. I don't have to call them and ask them for any special favors. I just get the grace period and I can pay my bill late with no penalty. That's basically grace in a nutshell. So when you think about grace, oftentimes, again, there's the biblical version of grace, but that can be taken out of the context of any type of religious background and think about it just as humans. We often ask for grace and we need grace. So grace is just goodwill and being courteous, being kind, being nice, being pleasant. It is, as far as, it's just an unmerited gift of love and forgiveness for which the person doesn't have to do anything or be anything, right? So, thinking of grace in that sense, what does grace do for us mentally? Well, grace brings us peace. When I know I don't have to do or be anything, and all of my behavior will be accepted, forgiven, and I will be given love in return, that brings me peace. Um, Grace gives us hope. Sometimes, when you're going through things and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, the fact that you know that there's love and forgiveness and abundance in the world, which is what grace is, that brings us hope. And then grace can conquer all criticism because a negative spiral, and I talked about this in another podcast, just that internal dialogue of negativity, grace conquers that because grace tells me I don't have to do anything, I don't have to be anything. I am acceptable as I am, and I am already forgiven for things that I have not done, and I am completely loved. All right. So just thinking of grace like that. And so when I talk about it as a therapist, I bring it up. And one of the things I bring up is being gracious to ourselves. We give grace freely to other people. No problem. If you say my bad, if you bump into me, my bad, don't worry about it. Don't mention it. It was nothing. We give grace so freely to other people, but then sometimes we fail to extend grace to ourselves. So again, that whole forgiveness and love, and I don't have to do or be anything. That's kind of when I bring it up in therapy as the theme of, or as a usefulness of grace. I also bring it up in relationships. Anytime we're doing couples counseling, I always talk about making sure that you have grace and you extend grace because our partners are going to do things that are going to be, in our minds, egregious. And without grace, we can't give them forgiveness. Because remember, grace means you don't have to deserve forgiveness. It's unmerited. You don't have to do anything or be extraordinary to get grace. Grace just is given because, and it doesn't run out. So when you think about extending grace to others, again, we do it so effortlessly. Most of the time, I don't even have to give you steps to do it. But it really is a decision. So it's not that you have to try to make a process of how do I give grace to someone else. It's a decision. I'm going to give everybody grace. And sometimes we don't call it grace. Sometimes we call it things like giving everybody a pass. That's what I say. Can I get a pass? That's the same thing as asking for grace. It's saying, can I get something? Can I get forgiveness even though I know I was wrong? Give me a pass for that. As a social work educator, I say I give grace, meaning turn in assignments late. That's acceptable. I want you to learn more than I want you to meet deadlines. And so you don't have to come up with 100 million excuses. The dog doesn't have to eat your homework. If you say, hey, can I get an extra day to do my assignment? You get an extra day to do your assignment. That's grace. And the only reason my grace in the classroom runs out is because the semester does have to end. But other than the semester ending, there is no need for the grace to stop. But, and like I said, with other people. Now, grace doesn't mean I don't have boundaries. I'm not going to be a doormat, but it does mean that I can forgive you. I'm not holding any grudges. I understand that you are going to be you. That doesn't mean I continue to give you access to me. And so sometimes when I say these terms, there becomes this confusion of, okay, she says gives everybody grace. That just means I'm going to get used and abused. Oh, no. The grace for myself will not allow me to let you use and abuse me. So when I give myself grace, that means there may be a time when I did get abused. And I forgive myself for that. And then I put up my boundary and that doesn't happen again. But it's just the no hard feelings. I understand what you did is what you thought you needed to do at the time for whatever reason. Whether or not you thought it was right, I forgive you. That's being gracious. That's moving through life with grace. And I try to do that as much as possible because of the first thing I told you. Having grace brings such peace to your life. And it brings such hope to your life that learning how to live with grace is so important. But back to mental health, because that's why we're here today. Did you know, and you may not have known, because until I said I was going to do this topic of grace, I didn't know the research. But there's research on grace and mental health. So you can feel free to Google it. Just Googling those two words will give you all the information you need. But there was a study that shows that people who live and understand grace or have better mental health outcomes than people who feel like their mistakes are finite, that there is no room for, repentance or correction. They have worse mental health outcomes. So grace actually improves your mental health. And the study was done on young college age people to show that they had the most improvement in mental health when they had a belief and understanding of grace. Not that I'm trying to sell grace to anybody, but I oftentimes sound like I'm selling things to you. So I just got to tell you, not only is this something that I've always known intuitively and practiced, I've had anecdotal. And so in mental health, when you have seen results with no research or study, but you can say consistently in my practice, I know that when I impart grace and explain grace to clients, they show an improvement in their mental health. I have no research to back it up. That's called anecdotal research. So I have anecdotal research, and it's based on my years of experience and watching what happens when we talk about grace in a session. And I encourage a client to use grace on themselves, and then what happens, how that shifts their mental health. So I got to give a little more background because I feel like it's so important to me that you know what I know for you to be able to help yourselves and to empower you to be able to be mentally well on your own. If you choose to do therapy, great. Call me, hit me up, therapygys@gmail.com. I will help direct you to an excellent therapist if you need one. If you choose not to do therapy, self-help is a very, very, very valuable way to help yourself. But you need information to do that. And so I try to provide some types of information. So in times of stress, and we all have times of stress, especially times of anxiety, our autonomic nervous system takes over. And the autonomic nervous system is the nervous system that engages this flight, fright, freeze part of your brain, where either you're going to fight whatever you consider, whatever's causing you to feel anxious. You're going to fly away, flight. And I said fright also, so you might just get scared. a freeze. You might not be able to do anything. That is automatic. You don't get to choose which one you are. Some of us tend to be one or the other. So a lot of times people will say, well, I don't know which one I am. The easiest way to figure out what you are is to watch for patterns in your life. If when you get stressed, you may say constantly, I need a vacation. I need to get away. I need a vacation. You're a flighter. You run from things. Nothing wrong with that. That's just your automatic way. If in times of stress, you do nothing, you shut down, you cannot move, you're a freezer. You can't, it stops. You disconnect from everything. If when you get stressed or problems come up, it overwhelms you in terror. You get a lot of fear. You notice a lot of worry and constant being scared. You're a fighter. And if you are like me, in times of stress, you fight back. You're a fighter. Now, we tend to believe that fighters are better. And from a personal standpoint, I know that fighters don't know when the fight has been like when you don't need to battle anymore. And so you constantly feel like you're fighting everything and everywhere. So fighters, we're not better. I know we think we're better than everybody else because we don't freeze up and, we'll battle anything, but we'll battle to our demise. So we're not better than anybody else. Sometimes it's good to cut your losses and run. We don't know when to do that. We just keep going. Sometimes it's good to do nothing because the problem itself will take care of itself. But we don't know how to leave well enough alone. So we jump in there, we fight, and we break things that ain't even broken. So if you are a fighter and you thought you were better, don't leave this podcast today thinking that anymore. But we have no control over which one we are. It's just the way our autonomic nervous system is wired that we're going to do one of these. And again, none of them are consistent. In different situations, we may have different reactions. So I might say I'm a fighter, but there's certain situations where I'm not going to fight, I'm going to run. And generally there is a dog involved. So if you know me, you know I'm running from a dog, not a fighter when it comes to dogs. But my autonomic nervous system engages. I see a dog, it could be a little cute puppy. To you, I'm out of here, I'm running. All right, but back to grace, right? We have no control over which one of these is going to get engaged. But generally, after the situation is over, if you're any type of reflective person, you're going to think about the situation. You're going to analyze it. You're going to try to use it as information to guide your life so that if you ever encounter this situation again, you know how to deal with it. In doing that, generally, you bring criticism. I can't believe I ran. I can't believe I froze. I can't believe, and then that negative internal dialogue shows up. Grace conquers that. That's where grace comes in. Grace is the fact, when you apply grace in that situation, one, you know that this was out of my control. This was my autonomic nervous system showing up and showing out. Had me running 100 miles an hour, directly into a brick wall, but it showed up and showed out. So when the autonomic nervous system gets engaged, after the fact, apply grace to that situation and understand, I love me and I forgive myself for doing exactly what my human body was designed to do in a stressful situation. Let my autonomic nervous system take over so that I can just respond to this situation in a way that my body thought was best at the time, right? So grace allows you to do what you thought was right. But then in reflection, realize, okay, maybe there was a different way I could handle it without the criticism. So grace conquers criticism. Grace conquers perfectionism. As I talked to y'all before about dealing with imposter syndrome and dealing with, just being in a new situation. Perfectionism shows up. And the only thing that you can conquer perfectionism with is grace. Because if I don't allow myself to be human and I always try to be superwoman, then I'm always going to feel overwhelmed and stressed. But grace tells me it's okay to be human. So there's that saying, she believed she could, so she did. But there's the other one that I love that says she believed she could, but she was tired, so she took a nap. That's what grace tells you. That even though I can conquer all, I don't have to. I'm allowed to be tired. I'm allowed to be hungry. I'm allowed to need love. I'm allowed to be vulnerable. And that's what grace allows us to do. It allows us to understand that we're human. It allows us to give ourselves extra self-care. Not because we deserve it, because grace does not require any deserving. It is unmerited. love, and unmerited forgiveness. So grace allows me to say, oops, and keep rolling. Grace allows me to say, I'm tired, and sit down. So just thinking about grace like that. Now, how do I use it as a therapist? The same way I'm telling it to you. That's the way I explain it to my clients. And then we look at their situation and see where grace could be used in that situation, right? So if you messed up at work, and that's what we're talking about in therapy, I said, let's apply grace to that. Let's look at it through a lens of grace. Okay, now what can we do? Now, grace allows you to problem solve, because when I am in that critical, kind of hopeless, negative cycle, it's like a hamster on a wheel. I can't get off of this. I can't figure it out. But if I apply grace to that situation, okay, now I have forgiven myself, and now I love myself. Now I can problem solve. So as a therapist, what I do is I try to teach you that grace is, it never gets exhausted. Grace is always a sufficient answer to whatever that criticism is. Like if you say, well, I don't think I did the right thing. Grace tells you you don't have to have done the right thing to be forgiven. I know I messed up. Good. Because grace tells me that I can have done the wrong thing and still get forgiveness. So grace is extended personally to myself. It is an unlimited supply of love and forgiveness. I like to live my life with grace. And the one of the things that brought me the most joy recently, when I left a job and they did a going away for me, and everyone kind of was saying that I exuded grace, without knowing that that has been my goal in life, is to be gracious and to live my life in such a way that you know that grace kind of flows through me. And so for them to have seen it, it just made my heart sing. I was full of joy. And so I want to offer grace to you today. Try to exhibit grace in your life, and often try it. You can call me or email me, therapygys@gmail.com, or hit me up on Instagram and say, I tried the grace principle. It didn't work for me. Nothing I tell you is foolproof, but the fact that there's research backing it, that grace helps with mental health, now I even feel more, assured that I'm doing the right thing when I talk about grace. So I want you to go forth and live your life full of grace, and have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.